Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're continuing our section, Book 4 of the Politics, which we started last session with chapter 1. Now, today we're looking at chapter 2, which is again the beginning of the discussion of the regime, the so-called practical books. So let's continue here. Let's look at this starting here. This is chapter 2, this line. Since in our first inquiry concerning regimes, we distinguish three kinds of regimes: kingship, aristocracy, and regime, politeia. Politeia. This is again Lord's, you know, regime. The politeia called politeia. Okay, and three deviations from these: tyranny from kingship, uh, um, oligarchy from aristocracy, and democracy from polity. Now, let's look at five. He goes. This is from book 6. And further, sorry, and since aristocracy and kingship has been spoken of, this is why people say, wait a minute, since we've spoken of aristocracy and kingship, that means we talked about 7 and 8, and kingship and the book 3, right? So therefore, this is what another people why you should read the other books too before here, right? This is okay. This is uh, why we should look. This is we have discussed aristocracy, but the argument is maybe they would discuss aristocracy also, the best regime. So therefore, okay, good. For to study the best regime is the same as to speak about the regimes designated by these terms as well, as each of them wishes to be established on the basis of virtue that is furnished with equipment. Um, um, this is often referred to book 3, chapters 15 through 16. But the only real discussion of aristocracy is the best regime at book 7. So therefore, this is why we have this concern about this thing, right? And that 6, yes, it's 6. Yeah, something not wrong with the notes. Okay, well, let's continue, right? With equipment, right? Virtue with equipment. Equipment means to do virtue, right? And further, since the difference between aristocracy and kingship, and when a regime should be considered a kingship, were discussed earlier, what remains is to treat the regime. Okay, I don't this I again I want you to. I think by translating in polity, the Greek will leave you kind of like okay, we have to talk about the regime, right? We have to talk about regime, okay? I think this is the point. That this is at one level he wants us by doing this we lose something of the text. We lose the kind of playfulness that we're having to. He's playing on that. Oh, there's a regime called regime, but was but regime. Okay, again, that's what I mean. This is why by saying polity, I think this misunderstands it. We don't see that the discussion of this regime called regime focuses on the nature of all regimes. Okay, in other words, and that therefore the science of regimes look at all regimes in that sense. And that for all the varieties, the defective in that can point to this concept of regime. Okay, so that's why it's. I think this is by saying polity, we misunderstand what the thrust of what's going on here. Again, this is again just kind of kingship. Again, I think he's right. When kingship should be established, the rendering here gives a normal meaning of Nozar, right? As what we again that was discussed in book 3, and as was discussed earlier, again chapter 8 with reference to again book that those discussions at the end of book 3, 15, 6, chapters, book 3, 15, 16, and 17. That is what is called the name common to all regimes, and the other regimes, oligarchy and democracy and tyranny. So we have to talk about the regime that has the same name as the regime that is common to all regimes and the other regimes, oligarchy and these, right? So we have to talk about this. But this is what left it. We talked about kingship. We did that in end of book 3. We talked about aristocracy, which we'll do in 7 and 8. But now we have to deal with the power, the regime called regime. The regime that's the regime, regime, the name that's common to all, right? And as well as oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny, right? It is now evident. It is evident also which of the deviations is the worst and the second worst. The deviation from the first and the most divine regime must necessarily be worst. But kingship must necessarily either have the name alone without being such, or rest on the great superiority of the person ruling as king. So tyranny is the worst, and farthest removed from a regime, right? This idea of a regime. Now, this is why they say in politics, sometimes it's taken, but both alternatives pose difficulties. What is wanted instead is a reference to kingship. And I think this is I think Lord is kind of missing the point here in that the regime and tyranny are the opposites of this. Regime further move, in other words, of it is the least regime-like, and the argument is that a regime. Remember, a regime is a political. It is the ordering of by which the how politics emerges within a community. Okay, it is the ordering, the form, the eidos, you say, of for the way men, the actors, the citizens, will direct their city towards. Right. This is the realm of politics. Right. And what is politics? Politics is not. It's the rule over free people. Politics is the rule of being ruled and ruled in turn, and therefore this is not. It is opposite of. It is opposed to mastery, which is the rule of unfree people. Right? It is to be where one is not free, one does not rule, one is always ruled. Okay, and I think this is why it says tyranny is furthest from a regime in that its rule is wholly despotic in this character, right? It is mastery. It is coercive mastery, and therefore it is the least. It is farthest from political life. This is what this line is meant here, and I think this is how we should understand this. Oligarchy is second worst, for aristocracy stands far from this regime, and democracy is the most moderate. This is great. The most moderate. So wait a minute. He says that this is why he says what's the worst? The worst is tyranny. The second is oligarchy is second worst. But then democracy is the most moderate. Most moderate. Most moderate of defects or most moderate of what? We assume defects, but the Greek also can mean it's the most moderate of regimes. Whoa. Okay, that's again we have to be careful. What appears to be his repeating of the typology that asserts that democracy is defective, and we are left with a weird, a kind of repeating of the sixfold typology, which in the book 3 gets deconstructed because number doesn't. We show that the quantitative number many is not what really defines the regime. Okay, what defines the regime is this, and he kind of repeats the idea of the typology, but then what we get is a kind of instead of 3 deviants, we get the argument is that democracy is the most moderate. Now, as an earlier thinker has expressed this view as well, though without looking at it the same we do. Okay, now this is Plato's Statesman. This is that famous thing in the Statesman where he kind of hints, Plato in the Statesman or the Politicos gives a kind of defense of democracy, right? It's the most moderate. But he does not doing it the same way. Therefore, he's saying we didn't, for he judged them all to be respectable, there being a good sort of oligarchy, for example, as well as the other, with democracy as the worst, but the best of the bad sorts. But we assert that these are generally thought an error, and that it is not right to speak of one sort of oligarchy as better than another, but at least less bad. Right? he's kind of criticizing that one is better than the other. Okay, this is like maybe, and I think this is even more important that there's a good form of oligarchy, and he's saying that maybe not because something maybe this is not so much to say that all those regimes are bad, but oligarchy you cannot talk about oligarchy being good. There's something more defective about oligarchy. Something about oligarchy not okay. This is why this passage is very strange here. Again, where he judged them all respectable, right? This is this Plato of state, discussion of Plato in the statesman, or politicos, right? It's not really statesman, it's political, the politician, the political man, right? Um, um, uh, he does respect, well, there being a good sort of oligarchy, for example, as well as the others, right? And democracy as the worst, but the best of the bad sorts, right? And then, but he goes, but we now in this situation assert that they're that they are generally in error. These regimes are generally in error, and that it is not right to speak of one sort of oligarchy as better than another, but as less bad. Okay, in other words, the idea is that it's not better, good, but rather less bad. It's asserting that the logic of what is this argument is that we can't say it's better than the other one. We have to say it's less bad than the other one, right? That's the argument. Now let's continue. As regard this sort of judgment, let us dismiss the matter for the present. So we dismiss it. At this moment, this whole new discussion of this whole return of the typology is returned to, but then summarily dismisses. It is, and something new is going to be brought up. So we get kind of a restart, a reboot of the discussion of regimes here, a reboot. That a reboot from what was done at this typology. This typology is now going to be kind of away. It's away. At least this idea that this kind of way. Now let's go. As regard this sort of judgment, let us dismiss this matter for the present. Instead, we must distinguish first the number of varieties of regimes. Oh, so wait a minute. This typology is totally done away with. The idea is what are the varieties of regimes? If indeed there are several kinds both of democracy and oligarchy. Next, so therefore, what are the kind of regimes? What are the sub varieties of these? Are they different subordinate kinds of democracy and oligarchy? And then he says next, what is the most attainable and which is most choice worthy after the best regime? So the next is what's attainable and most choice worthy. So the first thing is we must distinguish number kind of regimes. We must first the number and varieties of the number of varieties of regimes. Next, we have to look at what is most attainable and most choice worthy after the best regime. And if there are some others that is aristocratic and beautifully constituted, but fitting for most cities, right? That's it. And which it is, okay? In other words, what most finely or beautifully constructed, but fitting for most cities. Next, because remember the next are here. Right? So this is this, next, and next, which is which of the others is choice worthy for cities? For perhaps democracy is more necessary for some than oligarchy, or for others the latter more than the former. So that's the third. The fourth, after these things, in what manner the one wishing to do so establish these regimes? How do you establish these regimes? I mean, democracy in each of its kinds, and likewise oligarchy. And finally, when we have provided as far as possible a concise treatment of these matters, we must attempt to describe the sources of destructions and preservations for the regime, both in general and in the case of each separately, and the reasons for which these particular matters come about in accordance with the nature of the matter. Okay, now this is 11. These topic appears to correspond to like one. This is book four. The first one, book four, chapters 3 through 6. Uh, 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 book second one, he says this is Lord. Book four, 6 through 7. The third, 4, 12, and 13. The next, 14 through 16 and 5. I disagree. I think while the last one is 5, I think we don't really get these. These are not. I think this is not a discussion of. Um, uh, uh, this is not really a discussion of this how to establish regimes. Establish the regime. This is about the nature of the institutions, the institutions. I think that, or honestly, I'm going to make I'm going to argue that this fourth, the fourth criteria is book 6. In other words, let's go back here for a second. I want to point this out. Next, which choice worthy for the cities and perhaps democracy and the others? And after these things, in what manner are the one wishing to do so establish these regimes? How to establish them? That's book 6. I think it's a mistake to understand that those 14, 15, and 16 of book 4, which it's where he goes into the offices, the deliberative offices, then the offices per se, and then the adjudicative offices, which is the famous Aristotle's kind of treatment of division of function and division of power. Right? We have Aristotle's kind of division of power, division of the functions of the offices. Right? Um, this is institutionalism. This is the institutionalism. This is his movement of institutionalism. It doesn't really. I think the interpretation to make this that this is where Aristotle gives his account of establishing a regime. No, you have to look towards book 6 for that. That is when book 6. And the argument is books. Everyone has been saying, well, Peter Simpson in his translation in its commentary on this, argues that book 6 is kind of like an appendix. It's like an additional thought. It's like well, we've done everything already, right? Because in book 5, in other words, but I'm going to argue that what happens is that there's a kind of throwing off of the order. That he suggests an order here, but he doesn't. Then he delivers it differently, and therefore, what we get here, and there's something else comes in the middle. We get a discussion of not the so-called polity, which I think would argue this. I think this question here is which is most choice-worthy in cities. This question, the third question, the middle becomes something more complicated. It forces us to the question of the reevaluation of aristocracy. We have a reevaluation of aristocracy here. He will talk about aristocracy here, but it's kind of a dismissive about the so-called aristocracy. Again, repeating what happened earlier, and we'll get a looking at a discussion of regime. But then the discussion of regime focuses more the regime called regime again about what's common for all regimes, how all regimes are to be doing it, and what's best for each. Okay, so yes, you get something about what is best for each, but all regimes are going to have to deal with this. How do you preserve them? How do you moderate them? How do you fix them? How do you counter the forces of them? And that's kind of like what is going on in I think in those chapters 10 and 11. I've written about this a little bit more up late, and this is why I think this is a very interesting point here. So we got the kind of outline of it right here. We got the idea of this fivefold criteria of what we're going to do. The last one is book 5, which then again he will then read this. He'll do this, and what the fourth one is not really that. Instead of getting we suppose that it is the account of the institution is that. But no, he adds the institutions, a further discussion of the flushing out of the regime instead. We get an account of institutions. Only after the account of institutions and the account of change, then we talk about the creation of regimes. And that is book 6. And this is my interpretation of that in that sense. And I hope you do this. If you have any questions or questions or things, please put them below, and I will respond to them there. This has been a tough thing. Maybe we should use the Greek and more than this. Um, uh, 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 well, there. If you have any questions, I will answer them, and that's it. Please put them there again. Like it, dislike it. I understand. Okay, say why. If you have not subscribed, please subscribe. Encourage others to subscribe. If you like this video, share it with a friend. Get others to do it. This is, I'm sorry, I'm a little bummed out today because I got another, dealing with letters of rejection. So about the article, I have to rewrite it. I rewrite something myself. Um, so you can help. You can, like I said, you want to if you want to subscribe, get others to subscribe, like the growth channel. Um, Follow me on the social media links below. If you want to help, this is getting a little expensive in the sense that the videos are out there, and I put enough on there, and they're too large number, and YouTube is now saying that you have to pay to keep your space. So it would be nice if someone would like to assist me in this matter. Yes, I'm doing this as beneficial, and Patreon and subscribes to our ways of doing this, helping. But I understand you're not doing anything for us, and you're not offering exclusives. This is the problem. This is a classic issue of the free rider. I'm doing this, trying to do this way, and trying to help. Um, uh, uh, I'm not doing this really for a living in that sense. And if you want to help assist a little bit, great. I would appreciate it. You can Another way you can help if you don't want to be subscribed to that, you can just buy my book through Lulu. This is a commentary, not commentary. This is not a sorry. I'm just a little puzzled. Not a commentary, but rather a workbook, a study book, which will help you guide through the text of the politics. It is not a commentary. It's not a summary of the text. It's kind of helping you understand the text. It gives charts, outlines, structuring of the different things that kind of as a workbook the guy do it. I live at the end of chapters, books. I offer some place where you can put your own notes on it. So it's a great thing. It's a great tool that you use when you're studying the Aristotle's text, and it'd be help me because if you buy it by Lulu, I get the whatever the sell. You buy it at Amazon, okay, great. I get something from it. But if you buy it from Lulu, I get what those companies get, the profit those companies, like Amazon and those places. But I understand Lulu charges too much shipping, and you'd rather get your. So okay, I just say that. That's it. I'm sorry if I'm a little at the end of this discombobulated, but I hope you guys have a good day, and see you when we look at chapter 3 next. Okay, bye bye.